Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second part of Seed to Seal. Well, if you're here first and you haven't watched Seed to Seal Part 1, I urge you to, after watching this, go to Seed to Seal Part 1 and watch that, because that's the farm visit at Fort Nelson Northern Lights Black Spruce Farm. And obviously, we're also growing other plants and distilling other oils there. Is not only black spruce. That's why now we always call it the Northern Lights Farm. And the photo behind me is the photo that I took personally last year during the Northern Lights Festival at the farm. And that's this side. That's the distillery, and those are the lights. Okay, so anyway, let's start. I'll start sharing screen. All right. Okay, in this one, I am going to talk to you step by step through the seed to seal process. This presentation, part of it I have used at the Philippines First Anniversary event on stage. And on stage, when I was talking on stage, the corporate staff were all approved of this presentation. So it should be pretty okay. Before that, I think before we know about Seed to Seal, it's important to know where Young Living started. And I made a video about how Gary started Young Living. Let's watch that first, okay? And the reason why Gary started growing his own plants, setting up his own farms, is because back in the 1990s, the master distiller in France, Henri Villot, told him that if he doesn't grow his own plants, the day will come when he will not have real oils. Let's see how that came about, okay? All right, so let's go back to a little bit of history of Gary and Young Living. So back in 1989, he got a little bit of lavender seeds from France and he planted it behind his office in Idaho. And he actually learned about essential oils back in 1983 or 84, and he started studying them. He would fly to France consistently and then Switzerland to learn about oils, order them, and test them out. And then back in 1990, he met Jean Nouvel, whom I'm going to talk about a little bit in a bit. And he started going to France to study about distillation, lavender growing, and testing for over 5 years. And then in 1999, he bought the farm in Utah. And then he went to Oman. He looked for frankincense. He followed the frankincense trail, went to Oman, and he studied frankincense, and he set up a distillery in Oman, and that's where we got our sacred frankincense. And then between the time 2007 to 2011, he went to set up the farm in Ecuador, and he lived in Ecuador. And there are a lot of oils from Ecuador that we have currently selling now: Ocotea, Cobaiba, Eucalyptus Blue, Dorado Azul, which is exclusive to Young Living, and a lot more. And then 2015, because we ran out of black spruce, he went to Fort Nelson, British Columbia in the winter colds, and he set up the farm in Fort Nelson. And unfortunately, in 2018, he passed away due to complications of an insect bite from the year 2010 or 2009. He was bitten by an insect while he was in the Amazon forest. He started a fever the next day. He went into treatments. He was sick for a while. And since then, he has always had respiratory issues. And in 2016, when he had a injury at convention practicing jousting, he had an injury in his left wrist. I can't remember which wrist. And then while he had a PICC line put into his shoulder, the PICC line was misplaced, and it affected some of his blood vessels and his heart, and there were a lot of complications that came afterwards, and unfortunately he passed away in 2018. Okay. And then about Young Living, in case you don't know, we've got farms all over the world, 21, if I remember correctly. And then we have, as you can see in this map, we've got global headquarters in the US, and then we've got international office, experience centers all over the world, the blue squares. And then we've got Young Living corporate farms all over the world. Those are the purple dots. And then the green dots are partner farms and distillery. So we source from all over the world. We source from where the oil is the best. Say, for example, from Japan, we've got like Hong Kwai is from Taiwan. And then we've got a farm in Taitung, we've got farms in the Philippines, in Australia, and then in South Africa and Bulgaria and all these different places. Okay, so we source from all over the world. Okay, about seed to seal, we obviously start with actually not the seed, but the soil, which a lot of people don't know. Gary's always talked about how important the soil is to the seed, to growing the plants. It's not only the seed quality that affects the plant, it's actually the soil quality that affects the plants. And the purity of the water, the temperature and weather of growing the seeds and growing the plants, because each plant requires a different kind of soil. For example, lavender needs limestone, because limestone actually traps the heat from the noontime, and then at night, underneath the ground is still hot, but outside is cold. So that really where lavender really thrive, and helichrysum actually. And so the ground we always use 50-year virgin land, and then the soil, Gary put nutrients, microbes, minerals, and we have to make sure that the pH of the soil is correct for that specific plant. And then after we grow it, and it has to be grown with love and care, because he has shown the workers that if we do not show love and care, the oil quality isn't as good. And I can attest to that because I've been to a lot of farms and a lot of different image harvests. When we say graze to the tree, it's much easier to cut and the oil quality is much higher. And we have a lot more oils. And then the harvesting, when we're harvesting, we also have to treat the plants and with respect and love and care. And we only choose the right time for the right harvests. What Gary does is he checks the bricks of the plant before we harvest it. And then the harvesting method, for example, lavender has to be harvested, I can't remember how many inches from the ground, so that the soil and the root stays healthy. And then whether it's being harvested by hand or by machine or by horse and winter harvest, also will affect the quality of the oil. And post-harvest, it means if that plant should be immediately distilled, or it can be kept under the sun or under the shade, whether it needs to be turned once or twice or 3 times, how long it needs to go under the sun or under the shade to dry, or whether it needs to be distilled immediately, all affects the quality of the oil. And then during distillation, obviously the shape of the cooker may affect. Gary has found that the round top of the distillation cookers do not work as well. That's why he changed all of them to the funnel type. And he actually once jumped into the steamer, the cooker, to watch how the steam travels. If you go to our St. Maurice farm, you'll see that each cooker has a different bottom, because that's how he studied how the steam traveled. And whether the plant materials is packed. And obviously, I think a lot of you have heard of the 3 really, really key item that would affect the quality of the oil is time, how long you distill it for, the pressure, and the temperature. And apparently, when we distill plants, most of the other companies were not very stringent about their qualities. They just distill it until the oil comes out. Whereas Gary has found out that the most therapeutic compounds actually come out at the end of the distillation. It's sort of like breastfeeding. If you have breastfed, you know how we always say that the heavier and the more nutritious milk actually comes out at the end of the feed. That's sort of how it is, that's how nature works. And then also post-distillation, and then we filter it by hands and we test it. In fact, we test it along the way of distillation. We test every batch of oil, and some of the oils needs to be mixed together, and then we test again. And then once everything passed, it gets delivered air freight to headquarters to the D. Gary Young Research Institute. And then they get tested again. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And let's find out how Young Living source our products. I got this information out of the Young Living website, but probably not everybody has looked at it. So we source them through verifying the seeds, and we have third-party substantiation to make sure that everything is as how Gary has set them up to be. And the authentication of the land. Some of our testing actually can test whether that oil comes from that land. It's pretty amazing. And the agricultural practices, how to harvest, as I said just now, the harvesting, the seeding, and the growing, it's all about the sourcing. And we've got partner firms who have signed contracts with us, and we have teams who go out there, scientists and legal teams who go out there and make sure that they're following our protocol. And then the sourcing, when Gary was researching on plants, he would put in enzymes. And all these photos I got out of this book. If you haven't had this book, you can order it from your VO. The second edition is written by Mary. It's much thicker. This is the first edition that was written by Gary. We were very excited when Gary wrote this book, when the first one came out, because I always had to follow him around the world, and I followed him around the world between the year 2011 and 2016. While he was traveling, wherever he was, you could nearly see me next to him. And I was seeing him so often. I traveled with him over those 5, 6 years, like 30 times. I was seeing him like every 1 or 2 months. And they're like, Joanne, don't you live in Hong Kong? Why are you always here? I said, well, it's only a flight away. And so these books, you really, really have to get a copy because it will take me like 10, 12, 13, 15 hours for me to tell you everything. And so what I'm going to tell you now is just the key points. So what Gary have studied is that when he puts enzymes and foliage feeds, microbes controlling pH and the nutrients to feed the soil, the plant actually behaves differently. And you can see in this photo that the longer E has everything that is being fed on it. And you can see in this photo that they treat it with frequency, they treat it with biogenics, and they treat it with biogenesis and frequency. And you can see that the leaves are much more abundant. The plants is much healthier, and this is what Young Living does. And on the right, it's a weather station that Gary is so proud of. He installs this in Ecuador. It studies the UV, and he compares the UV to the bricks. Who does that? Like, he compares the UV, he studies the UV, the weather, the humidity, I remember he told us, and the temperature, the pressure, and the daylight time of each day. And then he tested against the oils, the plants. Also, and which I haven't actually talked about here, is that the altitude and the latitude also affects the plants. In the book, he would have talked about it. In fact, peppermint cannot grow in very high altitude because the menthol level is quite low, but Gary managed to grow it in Utah, which is quite high from sea level, and still get really high menthol. Anyway, so that's the stuff that Gary did, and we're still doing in our Young Living farms to make sure that all the plants are healthiest and the best quality. And then how he sourced it, other than finding seeds, and now he also sourced a lot of our oils from aromatic plants and that were grown in the Amazon forest. I have made a little video to show all of you how he sourced from the Amazon forest.
Headed deep into the jungle on the northern frontier of Ecuador, going into the Colombian rainforest, where there's a lot of guerrilla warfare because of the drug trade. But where it's the most dangerous is where the best oils grow.
Enséñale tu músculo. Ahí va. ¿Cómo es? Quizás si estamos trabajando, tendremos la oportunidad para celebrar una celebración y todas esas cosas, algo así, cualquier cosa, pero no estamos.
Yeah, they might tell them when they kiss their girlfriend that tastes good.
Cuando bese a su mujer, a su novia, bueno, ahora se sabe muy bien, ¿sabes?
Let me look. We're deep inside the jungle now. We came upriver about 45 to 50 miles, and then we got out of the boats and came into the jungle. What was an old logging road where they used to cut wood. As we're exploring for plants, we're probably about 3-4 miles in from the river now, inside the jungle, and if I had an external mic, you could hear the music of the birds and macaws in the trees. Quite spectacular. Guys, we have a very interesting leaf configuration. You see how it starts here coming off of the main limb, and then we get two runners coming off to the side, and it goes down to the next junction, and then divides and makes two, and then divides and makes two, and divides and makes two. It's a very, very fascinating structure here. So good. Our next $1 million plant.
I love that video about him. I got it from the Young Living Essential Oil YouTube channel. And every time I saw him bite on the plant, it reminds me of this Chinese folklore god of medicine, because he would do the same thing. He'd go into the jungle and try out the plants. Okay, all right. So this I also got out from the book. It's how Gary has found out that different plants has you see on the left, the time and plant material is Dorado Azul. You need to distill it immediately after cutting. Ruda, you need to distill it 5 days after cutting. Oregano, I remember the oregano is you have to distill it 5 days after cutting, but every day you got to have somebody go and turn the plants 3 times. Okay, so a total of 15 times under the shade. And lemongrass, 3 days after cutting, vetiver, 7 to 10 days after digging. Eucalyptus blue, 3 to 5 days after picking, ylang ylang immediately after picking, and ocotea 10 days after picking, palo santo 5 years after death of the tree. Isn't that amazing? And how does he found out? Because he can test the bricks of the plant. And we have a photo here with Panchito. There's a story about Panchito, but we can talk about that next time. And squeezing out the oil from the extract from the plant, and then putting it on the big bricks. It's called a refractometer, and you can find one of these in the lab in the farm. I've seen one, and you can read the bricks, and when the bricks is high, it means that the oil is ready to be distilled. And you can see the examples of brick testing in the lavender and Saint Marie's. If it's shade dry after 42 hours, the bricks is 24. And the Mona, if it's shade dry for 48 hours, the bricks is 28. So the Mona actually has a higher bricks, and it will be shade dry less time, and it has a higher bricks. So what Gary used to do is he used to have scientists, and he or him himself would go out into the field and test the bricks every hour, just to make sure that the bricks will continue to rise until it drops a little. That's when he knows that's the time, right? And it's fascinating. And the testing, the components, say for example, eucalyptus blue, if it's, as you can see, lot 26808, if the alpha pinene is 19.9%, it's accepted. If it's 28.9%, it's rejected. And you can see that Gary actually, for each plant material, he has set the range of acceptable range for each component in each essential oil. And we have to always match that to Gary's standard in order for us to approve the oil, okay? All right, and this is how he sourced our oils. You can see on the left, that jungle is actually the farm, the Ecuador farm, before Gary did anything to it back in 2006. And you can see there's a tiny wordings, distillery site, the arrow, and on the left side is the photo of the current farm, Ecuador farm, the aerial view. And you can see that the distillery site that is here is now here. Okay, if you can see my cursor, which is also here. All right, okay, so he dug out the pool, he dug out the pond, he did the irrigation, he planted the seeds. Insane, like Really, seriously, who would go through all of that just to get oils, right? Okay, and learning, how does Gary learn everything that he has learned to make sure that our seed to seal protocol is the best, will make the best oil? So first of all, about lavender. So back in 1990, he met the Landau family, actually Jean-Noel Landau. They met in an American Health Expo, and Jean-Noel invited him to France, in Provence, the southern part of France, to visit his farm, because Jean-Noel actually is a lavender grower. And then when Gary went to visit Jean-Noel a month later, they met up, and Jean-Noel started teaching Gary about growing lavender. And this little boy in the carrier is this big boy, Nicholas Landau. He's a favorite of Young Living Hong Kong members because he speaks with a slight French accent. He's fluent in English. If you've never heard him speak, you have to, because he's currently the manager of the lavender farm in France. And I urge you all to watch this Facebook video. If you Google this, Young Living Hong Kong Facebook page, Nicholas Landau, and you will see this. I don't know if you can copy this out of this presentation. It's of a presentation that Nicholas did on true lavender, the difference between true lavender, cloned lavender, and lavandin. You have to watch it. After you've watched it, you will not use any other lavender except our own. And so this is Jean-Noel, and this is a screen cap of the video that Nicholas did for us. You have to go watch it. And Jean-Noel eventually introduced Gary to a lot of the lavender growers, the distillation, the experts, the essential oil experts, introduced them all to Gary. Okay, and this was also introduced by Jean-Noel, and this is Marceau Espier. He's the president of Lavender Grower Association, and he was the one who taught Gary how to grow lavender and how to distill it. Gary went back and forth between Provence and Utah to learn from him. And there's another story for another time, and how he eventually, after 5 months, he would teach Gary what he wanted to learn, because you know, in the old days, the French people did not like to share the knowledge and the wisdom with people who do not speak French. And I have a video here that I recorded myself back in 2014 during my first diamond retreat, and we went to visit the farm in Provence. And Jean-Noel was there, and Jean-Noel brought Madame Espier, and he brought us to meet with Gary, and it was a surprise for Gary. Gary didn't know that he was going to see Mrs. Espier. And unfortunately, Marcel has passed away a few years before that. And so I still remember Gary said it's been a few years since Gary has seen Mrs. Espier. And also before Marceau passed away, he was invited to Young Living Convention, and on stage, Marceau Espier said the student has now become the teacher. That means that actually he's now learning how to distill really, really amazing oils from Gary. And that's really, really something that was very encouraging to all of us to hear. Let me play this little video. Please observe how Gary did not speak French, and his facial expression and how they communicate.
This is Marcel's wife, Martha, and she's the one that would take care of me while I was here, feed me, make sure I ate. Wash my clothes, iron my clothes. Same as my mom.
And so Martha was saying that, yes, I make sure that he slept also, because I can understand French. I speak French, so I know what they're talking about. It's really cute to watch them. Gary was so grateful, and you can see that Martha was also very, very grateful. It's just a really, really sweet moment to observe. And it was really amazing to observe how the relationship between Gary and all these French people, who must have been super arrogant back in the days, because they actually don't speak, they refuse to speak English, and they refuse to communicate and pass their wisdom to anybody from America, especially to this cowboy. But obviously Gary's motivation and hard work really touched them. And then also later on, Marceau introduced Gary to the father of distillation, Henri Viot, and he was the one who told Gary that if you do not grow it yourself, there will come a day when you will not have pure oils. And here is Henri Viot, and this is him. And he went back and forth France, and every time he went, he would learn from Mr. Viot about distillation. And this is the book that Henri Viot wrote, Distillation Quality, Controlling the Purity. Okay, and then this is another teacher that Gary learned from. His name is Dr. Jean-Claude Lapraz. He, as an MD, is a medical doctor. And the first lecture that Gary went to attend after being introduced to therapeutic essential oils by Anne-Marie Buller back in 1983-84. That presentation was done in Switzerland, Geneva, and Jean-Claude Lapraz was one of the speakers, along with another oil essential oil expert, I forgot his name. And these are the books that he's written about endobiogeny, which means like natural plants and herbs, extract and essential oils on health. And then this is Dr. Radwan Farad. He is a professor of biochemistry in Cairo University in Egypt, because, you know, as we all know, that Egyptian has long used essential oils for over 5,000 years. And Egypt, where else is better to learn about the biochemistry of essential oils? And Dr. Farad also went to Riverton, the old Young Living office, to visit Gary. And as you can see, all these study papers show that Dr. Farad spends most of his time publishing information and published papers, research papers on essential oils. You can easily Google him. And then there is Philippe Maillebout. Philippe Maillebout is the person who introduced Gary to the idea of emotions and temperaments. And this is an English translation of the book that Philippe Maillebout wrote in 1996. He still teaches essential oils, but Mr. Maillebout is not a scientist, and he is a scientist, but he is not a farmer, so he does not grow his own plants, and he does not distill his own plants. He only uses the oils. Okay, and then there is, of course, Dr. Hervé Casabianca, who is Gary's mentor in testing essential oils. As you can see, Mr. Casabianca works for the French National Center of Scientific Research and in the analytical science, and he has also published 69 papers on food and agricultural chemistry, aromatic and medicinal plants. He is one of the leading world scientists in essential oil testing. And we have a lot of these Gary learned from Mr. Casabianca. Okay, so he has the best teachers in the world. And then I don't know if you know that Young Living is the largest seed-grown true lavender in the world. We have the largest true lavender in the entire world. And as you can see, actually a lot of the lavender labeled in lavender non-Young Living brand, if they're labeled lavender, a lot of times they're lavandin. The properties are different, the compounds are different, the uses is different, they smell very similar. But Gary always said that lavandin has a higher camphor percentage, so it burns skin. We use it in purification. We have lavandin as one of the ingredients in purification because of the qualities of how we use purification. But lavender has a different usage than lavandin. And as you can see, I got this chart, this pie chart, is that 52% of the lavender in the world comes from Bulgaria. And most of, actually, and then to only 26% of the true lavender comes from France, and then the rest of the world, as you can see. However, only seed-grown lavender is only grown in France. A lot of the other Lavandula augustifolia species is actually cloned, what it means by cloning, it means that they all have the same mother. No, they all have the same clone mother. So imagine you having uh, triplets and they are all identical twins. Imagine having a room full of students, but they all look exactly the same and they have the exact DNA and genetic makeup. And imagine all of these students continue to be cloned for 20 to 30 years. So everyone in the world is cloned from that same plant, that same person, whatever that person's illness has, whatever health profile it has, it is being cloned all over the world. And that is what cloned lavender is. That's why I urge you to watch the video that Nicholas did for Young Living Hong Kong, because that's what he talked about. And the lavender, the Lavandula augustifolia that is grown in France and our Young Living farm is the largest seed grown, okay? Most of the Bulgaria lavender is cloned. I don't know about the ones in China, but how can you tell is when you look at the farm and they all have the same shade, because Lavandula augustifolia, true lavender, is supposed to go from the shade of white to blue to purple, light purple to dark purple. If you go to a lavender farm that has all the same color, it's either lavandin or it's cloned lavender. It's not true seed-grown lavender, okay? And also another thing is for the seed to seal, our quality is assured by both our legal department, our science department, okay? And we also always consistently have a third-party quality audit to make sure that everything is followed as it has been set out. And the science, obviously, seed to seal part of it is 3 pillars. It's sourcing, science, and standards, right? The science, we have amazing science. First of all, is partnership. We have established really good science and sourcing relationship with our farms. And then we have binding agreements with our partners. And we spent millions of dollars on our cutting edge testing equipments. And we continue to audit our farms and our testing. And I love to talk about this because we have over 50 highly trained research scientists in our D. Gary Young Research Institute. A science team of 10 is big. A science team of 30 is very big. A science team of 50 in a privately owned essential company is unheard of. Okay, and we also, not only do we do the testing in-house, we also do third-party testing. Young Living works with more than a dozen of the world's leading independent accredited labs with highly skilled and trained scientists. I know that one of the science labs that we work with also work with the FBI to catch criminals because you need science. It's like CSI, right? And then all of our oils and all of our products go through at least 13 types of different testing. I know that a lot of people talk about GCMS, but to test essential oils, but the best way to test essential oils is not only with GCMS. That's our first step. That's the basic thing that we do. We also put them through like different heavy metals, different types of spectrometer, the ICP-MS, all of these you can see at Young Living warehouse visit, because that's where our lab, part of our lab is, and also the headquarters, we also have a lab. The one machine that I want to talk to you about today is the IRMS, the isotope ratio mass spectrometer, the one that I've pointed out with a red arrow here. The reason why is because it's a really, really amazing equipment. The equipment by itself, one machine costs over $1 million US. And we are the only privately owned company that uses this machine, this testing machine in North America. All the other institutes that own this machine are either governmentally owned labs or university labs. Young Living is the only privately owned company that has this machine, and Young Living has 2 of these machines. And you also need the training of 13 years to know how to use it. So it's not that you have the money to buy the machine and you know how to use it. You have to have the skills to use the machine. Okay, so what does this machine do? Let me use an analogy. Let me use a funny, very practical analogy. You know, swimming pools, and you know, when you've got small kids swimming in swimming pools who are not wearing swim nappies, you know what happens, right? They pee in the pool. And a GCMS will be, if you test the water with GCMS, you'll be able to test that somebody peed. Okay. If you use an IRMS to test the pool water, you'll be able to see the age of the person who peed, if it's a child, if it's an adult, the race of the person who peed, probably what they ate for lunch before they came to swim in the pool. And that's how powerful this machine is. And that's why when we put our oils through this testing machine, we can test exactly where it's grown, whether it's contaminated, and how pure it is. Okay, it's crazy. And then, so standard, it's, of course, we follow the Lacey Act compliance program. We make sure that all our products, all our plants are sourced responsibly. And we also have the legal team to follow the compliance. You see these three pillars is the science and the legal team. They both work together. That's really pretty cool. And we always love the environment. Gary was adamant about one tree. When we cut down one tree, we go 3 and we replant. And Gary always called his team the reforestation team. And it's really cool. It's really a lot of work that have been put into making sure, ensuring that our products, our seed, our soil, our distillation process, the testing process, and if it doesn't pass any of these standards, it won't get sealed and it won't get into your hands. So you can really, really believe in every single bottle of essential oils that is changing lives all over the world. And you know that we've got, what, 4 million or 6 million members worldwide, families worldwide using Young Living on a monthly basis. That's pretty amazing and pretty awesome. So with that said, thank you very much. That's the end of this presentation. If you haven't watched part 1, please go to watch part 1, and I'll see you next year. Bye.